God of War Ragnarok slays the sophomore slump with a familiar, yet superior sequel. God of War Ragnarok is arguably the year's most anticipated game, and you needn't look further than its predecessor to understand why. Released exclusively on PlayStation 4 in 2018, Sony Santa Monica's God of War simultaneously delivered a canon-respecting sequel and a significant series reboot. It also turned the medium's most perturbed protagonist into a burly, bearded dad, paired with an AI preteen companion. Any of these potentially problematic choices would have sunk a lesser game, but God of War pulled it off brilliantly, delivering the long-running franchise's best entry yet. Of course, the popularity and success of Kratos and Atreus' first adventure puts its sequel on the spot, saddling it with unrealistic expectations to re-raise the bar. Toss in the fact finicky fans have suggested it'll be held back technically by Sony's decision to put it on both the PS5 and last-gen PS4, and the father-son duo face a challenge as daunting as thwarting a pack of angry dragger. Thankfully, they've returned prepared, armed with new weapons, allies, and a fresh dynamic fueling both their evolving relationship and ability to reduce mythical monsters to pulp. Ragnarok will still feel comfortably familiar to anyone who's split an ugly beast skull from behind Kratos' Leviathan axe, but by layering fresh elements into its proven formula, it also nails a rewarding balance between retaining what previously worked and taking that reliable template to new heights. The most surprising aspect of 2018's God of War was the emotional story at its center. Earlier entries put Kratos front and center, but his PS4 debut saw him sharing the spotlight with Atreus, a young son he hardly knew. Watching their connection evolve over the game was a highlight, one that presented the previously one-note protagonist as a more nuanced character, a widowed father struggling to bond with his child in the wake of his mother's death. Rather than recycling the same relationship dynamic, God of War Ragnarok, which picks up a few years later, takes it in riveting new directions. Atreus is now a teenager, more mature, confident and, to Kratos' dismay, cocky. They are at once closer than ever and pulled in separate directions, a complicated scenario shaped by both Atreus' teen angst and the events the two set in motion during the last game's conclusion. Spoiler warning for those who skipped God of War, the pair inadvertently triggered the Norse apocalypse, while also discovering Atreus may be a god himself, specifically Loki. These preceding events and revelations mold Ragnarok's overarching story, but they're also pretty personal to Atreus and his journey. And, by extension, they significantly alter, for better and worse, his relationship with his father. The game doesn't brush any of this aside in favor of spotlighting the titular god-slaying anti-hero, but rather gives Atreus' path the space and respect it deserves. In fact, Ragnarok feels more like Atreus' story, a surprising, yet welcome turn that twists the narrative in a number of unexpected, emotionally charged ways. This focus on the former boy takes the broader, central storyline in some compelling directions, but I was even more impressed by how it revealed new shades of Kratos and Atreus' personalities, while also putting a fresh spin on their relationship. Anyone expecting a gobsmacking reimagining on par with the previous games should bury their expectations in the snow. Ragnarok is unquestionably bigger and better, the product of a game that's retained, yet refined and polished, what previously worked, while complementing that formula with a slew of enhancements, both subtle and significant. But no, Kratos isn't suddenly packing a shotgun in turn-based battles or harvesting resources on a farm. This is a sequel in the tradition of most follow-ups to acclaimed games. It doesn't fix what isn't broken, and it smartly builds on what came before it. That'll be more than enough for most, but given how much 2018's entry changed the game, literally and figuratively, it's worth mentioning to nip any potential disappointment in the bud. God of War Ragnarok is not without flaws, nor does it represent a dramatic series reimagining on par with its predecessor. But it is a highly ambitious, incredibly polished follow-up that smartly retains and refines its forerunner's best elements, while building on that winning formula in meaningful ways. It's also one of the absolute best PS5 games, and a more than worthy sequel that should have fans raising a celebratory mug of mead. God of War Ragnarok slays the sophomore slump with a familiar, yet superior sequel. God of War Ragnarok is arguably the year's most anticipated game, and you needn't look further than its predecessor to understand why. Released exclusively on PlayStation 4 in 2018, Sony Santa Monica's God of War simultaneously delivered a canon-respecting sequel and a significant series reboot. It also turned the medium's most perturbed protagonist into a burly, bearded dad, paired with an AI preteen companion. Any of these potentially problematic choices would have sunk a lesser game, but God of War pulled it off brilliantly, delivering the long-running franchise's best entry yet. Of course, the